Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Genesis Community Livecast. My name is David Vogelpohl. I've been in the Genesis community for nearly 10 years now. I lead the Genesis brand at WP Engine, and I love to bring the best of the Genesis community to you here on the Genesis Community Livecast. Joining me in today's episode, I'd like to welcome our very special guest. First, the co-creator of Genesis, Mr. Nathan Rice. Nathan, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me. This is exciting stuff. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. We're going to be demoing Genesis block theme beta today and seeing how folks can help us out with understanding, what works for them and things like that. Really excited to do that and to have you here for that discussion. Also joining us is the creator of Atomic Blocks and now Genesis Blocks. I'd like to welcome Mike McAllister.
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to dig into where we're at and where we're going with some of this stuff.
I like it. I know that both you gentlemen have a team of folks you work with to build these things out. So definitely don't mean to imply it's just you two, but really happy to have you all here because I know you've played a big role in both of those products. Now, for those listening or watching, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to do a demo of using Genesis block theme, as well as leveraging Genesis blocks and also looking a little bit at Genesis custom blocks to see what it's like to make your first block-first WordPress build. So I like to think of this a little bit like painting with blocks versus painting with the theme. But we're going to kind of dive in and show you a little bit about what that's like, but also give you some pointers on how you can provide feedback to us as we prepare for the future of WordPress, and in particular, something called full site editing and kind of this new notion of a block first world. So in order to do that, though, I think it would be helpful for you all to have some context. So let me progress the slide here. First and foremost, I think it's helpful to understand kind of where we're at, but also like where did we come from? What do these moments mean in WordPress history? And the very first moment, of course, when WordPress was created by Mike Little and Matt Mullenweg, and this was version 0.7 of WordPress. Nathan or Mike, do you know why it's 0.7 of WordPress? Was the first version of WordPress?
Got me, man.
No.
Yeah, it's a little known fact, but Mike Little explained this on the Genesis Community Livecast during the episode about the contributions of the Black community to WordPress and some of the challenges that community still faces. But he talked a little bit about the history of WordPress, and WordPress was forked off of this software called B2 Cafe Log, where the maintainer of that software had stopped maintaining it. And then Matt Mullenweg said, "Who wants to help me maintain it?" And Mike Little said, "I did." And this is eventually what became WordPress. But the last version of B2 Cafe Log was version 0.6. So they continued that versioning when they got to the fork of WordPress. Enough nerding out about WordPress history, though. Let's talk about these key moments. So if you've been in WordPress for a while, or maybe you've just been around recently, there were some kind of really critical points in WordPress history where functionality, capabilities were added to WordPress that drastically changed how WordPress worked, how it was perceived, and also the ecosystem that surrounds it. One of these key moments was between 2004 and 2005 when plugins and themes were introduced. Of course, these were huge improvements in terms of the experience and level of customization someone could do to a WordPress site. So this was a critical and key moment. Another critical and key moment came in 2010 when custom post types with custom post meta were introduced into WordPress Core. Now, if you don't know what custom post types are, to me, this was basically the moment when WordPress became more of a CMS, like a proper CMS, where you could have different types of pages and different types of content models to edit on the back end. And we saw what I describe as a Cambrionic explosion. I'm getting all nerdy on this slide, right? We've got WordPress history nerd stuff. We've got science nerd stuff. The Cambrionic period was when there was this explosion of life forms. And we see that same thing happening right around 2010. The company we all work for, WP Engine, who owns Genesis and StudioPress, was founded in 2010. WooCommerce was 2011, just a year after these capabilities were introduced. Genesis, 2011, right, Nathan?
It was actually February of 2010 as well. So yeah,
Okay,
add
yeah,
another into the list. Yeah.
right in there as well. And then certainly a lot of agencies in the ecosystem either were founded, like big agencies were either founded at this time or started adopting open source because of it. You see a couple examples there on the right. And so my point here is that as these core and key technologies are added to WordPress, things change. But also what we see is an explosion of innovation, an explosion of entrepreneurship, and an explosion of the way brands use WordPress in their business and the way agencies use WordPress to service their clients. And we're in the middle of one of those moments right now. The Gutenberg editor was introduced into WordPress Core at the very tail end, December of 2018. And Gutenberg within WordPress, of course, is referenced as the block editor. Gutenberg's the feature plugin where they test all that stuff out in before it makes it into Core. But we saw that released in December of 2018 and iterative improvements to the block editor in WordPress Core ever since. And the next phase of of the block editor is where the block editor moves from only controlling content within the bodies of posts and pages into controlling and editing content in the header, like your navigation, the sidebar, and the footer. So just like with custom post types, just like with plugins and themes, this will be a drastic shift in the dynamics of WordPress. And what I expect to see in response to that is kind of, again, another explosion of innovation, another explosion of entrepreneurship and brands and agencies leveraging WordPress in creative ways. So let's get real. Before 2018, in its default state, and I don't mean adding plugins and page builders and things like that, but in its default state, WordPress really was for blogging. If you look at the default editing experience for a post between 2003, when Mike Little and Matt Mullenweg created version 0.7 of WordPress, it hadn't really changed in 15 years before the block editor was introduced. I mean, the design looks prettier. There's maybe a few buttons. Of course, we know we can add plugins and things back in 2018. But my point is the default editing experience was static for 15 years. I don't think I have any piece of technology in my life that stays static that long, and it did. And so really the way I think about WordPress now, that the block editor is a native part, or at least those kind of experiences are a native part of WordPress itself, is that WordPress, and particularly with full site editing, will be a modern site building platform, providing intuitive and easy ways for non-technical users to create content, but also really creative ways for engineers and developers to create custom experiences that are scalable. And so as you think about your block editor toolkit, I really think about it in three chunks. You have the blocks that come with WordPress Core and the features that are included within those blocks. Of course, there's also the block repo on WordPress.org. These are free blocks that are kind of part of the official WordPress ecosystem. The block repo, people have contributed those blocks. You also have plugins that might include a premium block library. Genesis Blocks is a lot like this. There's a library of pre-designed block sections and collections, which I'll actually show you in a minute if you haven't played with it. And then, of course, other plugins that might enhance the block editor in some way. And then the final piece is basically custom blocks. So if you don't like the blocks that come with Core, if you don't like blocks and things like block libraries, then of course you can create your own custom blocks or custom block-like experiences with block patterns. So what I think about all this, like I remember when Gutenberg, the block editor, was first being introduced, I remember a lot of people saying like, oh, I don't want to dumb down WordPress. I want to be able to do all that custom stuff I usually do and really push the envelope. But I don't actually think this is a big change other than maybe some positive elements to the way we've done things in the past. Now, what you're seeing here is a very familiar process to a lot of us. I started building and leading teams building web pages and websites like this and did so for many years. I'm sure you may even still do this, where you have a designer create a Photoshop file or XD or whatever the thing is, and then a developer who converts that design into some aspect of code, either be on-page content or within a theme or just in a plugin or some other aspect of taking that design vision and then translating it into a web page. Now, Mike and Nathan, you're both engineers by trade. Do you throw away your code when you're done with it? Mike,
No,
Nathan, no, you don't throw it
well,
away. Like if you
well,
make a web page, you just like never reference it again. Do you ever reuse that same code in another
oh yeah,
project?
yeah, absolutely. It's all an iterative process. You know, you don't want to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know, yeah, no, it's a very iterative process, and you don't want to necessarily throw away good stuff that can help you save time later on.
Sure. And if you have code that facilitates another 4-step form, of course, you're not going to start from scratch. You're just going to use
Right.
that base code, mod the styles, mod the functionality if you have to, and deploy it in the new context. So my point here is that this is a common workflow for developers, especially developers at freelancers and agencies, where you're reusing some of the same components or functions and sometimes even layouts over and over and over and over and over again. But you have this notion of recycling what you created to help provide efficiencies as you build out new things in the future. So again, totally familiar process here. But what the block editor allows you to do is it allows you to scale that innovation prior, especially around things like customizations. All of that work resided with your development team, or if you're a developer, with you. And so those content creators couldn't modify or really scale the things you were creating. You could create a custom post type and they could replicate that a bunch of times, certainly use plugins like ACF and other things like that to deliver these kind of experiences. But in its default editing state, WordPress didn't really have a lot of good answers for this. And what the block editor allows you to do is it allows you to take that kind of efficiency in recycling your innovation and scaling your innovation and extend it a layer to the content creators and marketers who were not able to mod the code. What we found at WP Engine when we adopted these types of build processes in building and empowering our content creators was that the value of what our engineers and our developers were building was greater. What they built was scalable. More people could use it, and more people could use it in ways that were relevant to them in their context, and they could customize parts, but maybe not other parts, to stick with things like brand consistency. But the efficiency was so powerful. The ability to iterate, get out new campaigns, get out new event sites. There's so many subvariants of this that we've used in our business. What ended up happening was, of course, that meant less work on some level for the engineering and design teams, but overall, it actually meant more work. Now, why do you think that is? Nathan, we'll go with you this time. Why do you think that it ended up being more work when we provide more scalable things to those users?
Because let's see, there's probably two come to mind. One is maybe that the things that you provide them aren't necessarily exactly what they want, so therefore there's still those custom requests that involve a developer or an engineer or something like that. And then the other thing would be if the thing that you provide them isn't exactly what they need, there may be that chance that they go in and try to start tweaking things themselves, ended up really screwing things up and making you have to come in and clean up their mess.
Absolutely. That's definitely part of it. I mean, certainly, as we know, even without things like scalable ways to deploy content and experiences like the block editor, of course, like they're going to fumble with the code and mess up the CSS and do other things to break the site, have customization requests. I feel like the block editor in general reduces that. But really, what in the WP Engine context, how it affected us was they had ideas. They were like, oh, can you have a block that does this? Can you have a block that does that? We have these events going on. We have these campaigns going on. It'd be great to be able to scale a new idea, leveraging these approaches. And so really it fundamentally increased the need of what that team built. And we actually doubled the development team's size because what they were building was more valuable and more scalable. So leveraging the block editor, leveraging that scalability increases the need of what you build. Now, this slide is actually a little out of date. There were some recent updates, but the public beta of full site editing appears to be coming in 5.6. But this slide is still relevant, and I'll explain. I'm sorry, 5.7 instead of 5.6. That was a change in mid-October, basically. Now, this slide is still relevant, though, and I think relevant for a couple of reasons. First off, 5.6, the release, is a very historic release. And one of the reasons it's historic is it's the first all-women release team for WordPress release. So Josepha Hayden the person in the top left there was one of the key organizers of this. Really love Josefa kind of getting behind this and making it happen. Other folks, Tanya Mork there on the third row, the third picture over. You see her, Nathan. Love Tanya, a longtime Genesis community member, doing lots of fun stuff now. I think she's over actually at WP Rocket right now. And then Sarah Riker, the person there with the orange box around her, she actually works on the WP Engine team, and she's actually also part of that release. But if you look here where that orange arrow is pointing, it says, ship default theme, including an FSE compatible version. Now that language is very particular. And the part that's particular, of course, you see FSE and full site editing, which I just talked about. But you see that notion compatible version. And what does that mean? Really, what it means is that themes built for full site editing will be different than the kind of themes we build today. And this is true in Genesis, it's true in every other type of WordPress theme. The way you build themes in any context, if you're building for full site editing, will be different. And this is why we wanted to do this video, to kind of show you a little bit about what that world will be like, but also to elicit your feedback to help us plan for it. You can read more about full site editing in this article on the studiopress.blog. Carrie is doing roundups of what's happening in full site editing as a guest post, if you will, on the blog. She's actually drafting a new one now to reference the push of the public beta of full site editing from 5.6 to 5.7. So check out studiopress.blog if you'd like to get into the nitty-gritty details of exactly what's happening. All right, we've given enough context. What about the live demo time? This is like my favorite part. All right, so we'll go ahead and exit out of that. And I'll go ahead and get my demo script handy so I don't lose track. For those that are curious, I'll be demoing using Local by Flywheel. If you go to localwp.com, it's a free local development solution for WordPress. And these are some of my demo sites that I use for different things. But that's what we're going to be using today. So to get started, I'm actually just going to go to the home page. So we'll go ahead and load that root URL there. And this is how Genesis block theme looks on the front end. Now, the most interesting thing about this theme is that there's not really anything interesting about it at all. It actually doesn't do a whole lot. And it does things like set the layout and provide styles for the menu and navigation. But remember, full site editing blocks are going to do that later. So this is one of the reasons why Genesis block theme just isn't really doing a whole lot. Of course, it also does the same for the footer. And again, the footer will be replaced by the block editor when full site editing is available. And again, you can choose the full site editing path. You're not going to be forced into it like on day one when it's released in WordPress Core. So Genesis framework, which builds themes in the way we all do today, will still work on day one of full site editing. Of course, absolutely. Well, every theme in WordPress is built that way or similar ways. And the FSE will be kind of a path, if you will. Over time, you're going to want to choose that path, the new path of FSE. But again, your site's not going to break on day one. So Genesis block theme, not really doing a whole lot. Again, setting styles and layouts for the header and the menu, as well as the footer. I think you have some sidebar styles in there as well, Mike, and really that much else. Now, the Genesis block theme does not use the Genesis framework. It was not built with the Genesis framework. And this gets back to that notion that it's really for the beta version in particular is really to give us learnings for building in this block first world. And this is where we need your help, those listening and watching, to help us with these tests and to provide us feedback as we prepare Genesis and the entire community for that future. So we now see the front end. So now let's go poke around in WP admin and see what we can, what trouble we can get into here in our first block-based build. So what I'll show you first is I'll just navigate over to themes. When you test this theme, it will be called Genesis block theme or Genesis block theme beta. I'm using an advanced copy called Johannes, like Johannes Gutenberg. But again, we're really not going to be messing with the theme at all. There are some customizer settings, but again, it's not relevant for our block first build. The other plugin I have prepared for this demo is two plugins are Genesis Blocks, which is free and available on WordPress.org. There's a pro version in Genesis Pro, but the version I'm going to show you today is the free version. And then we also have Genesis Custom Blocks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here, but I'll show you a little bit about how creating custom blocks works with Genesis Custom Blocks. So what we're going to do, if you'll notice here on the front end, I did pre-create some pages just to make the demo go faster. But other than that, I haven't really modded anything about the site. So it's pretty much just a core site with Genesis block theme, blocks, and custom blocks installed. So let's go ahead and go over to our pages and let's start building out a home page for our block first build. So if you've used Genesis blocks before, you may have noticed that there are blocks available in the block selector via the plus sign here in the editing view within a poster page. But I like to start actually by clicking on layouts, which is a button introduced by Genesis blocks, because I think that sections, layouts, and collections are really where the fun stuff happens. So as you think about testing Genesis block theme and Genesis blocks and custom blocks, this is similar to how you might go about building out a site and then thinking about what kind of feedback you provide to us. So in sections, a section is a collection of blocks, and it's basically representing a part of a web page. I always love to show this one. And Mike, since I have you here on this call, on this live cast, Fran's closed eyes. Do we have a picture of Fran with like open eyes? I do this demo like all the time, and Fran's always like,
She's just so happy that she can't stand to open her eyes, I guess.
I like it. I like it. Gianna's he's happy as well. I don't know what Kyle's expression is. He's kind of chill.
He's stoic.
He's stoic. I like it. So what we saw there, of course, is I clicked on the icon or the image, if you will, for this layout. I'm sorry, this section. And what you see is I have a part of a web page that loaded that's ready for me to edit. Now, actually, you can do similar experiences for yourself in totally custom ways by creating custom blocks or your own custom plugin. But right now I'm showing you Genesis blocks because that's what we're going to demo. Now, of course, the blocks are editable. I can go in and easily edit the picture. Actually, I don't know if I have any pictures in my media library, but trust me, I can. I can, of course, edit the text. And then there are design controls, just like with every other most other types of blocks. So I'm going to go ahead and back out of this, or Command Z. We'll go back to selecting whether the layout selector. So of course, there's all kinds of different parts of a website that I can drop in as I'm building my page or building out my site. And then the other thing that I can choose from is something called layouts. So if a section is a part of a page and a block is like one element within a page, a layout is a whole page of demo content. And this is great. I love, which one this is one of my favorite ones, the product launch one, because we're kind of launching a product here, at least a beta product, aren't we, Mike? Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we see here, of course, is now I have a whole page of blocks and sections, and these are referenced essentially as layouts. So as we think about like the scaling the value of what you do. So let's say you were an agency freelancer, maybe you're in-house for a company that launches things all the time. Well, you could leverage the product launch layout in order to make those launches go faster, have consistency with your pages. And then, of course, if you have the ability to also create custom versions of these things that you provide to the people using the things you create to help them move faster. We'll show you, again, Genesis custom blocks here in a bit. So we'll go ahead and Command Z out of this one. And this is also, this is a recent release. So you're really, the Genesis block theme beta is pretty much brand new, but collections were launched just a little bit ago. And this is available in Genesis blocks right now, so you can go try it out. But we now have this notion of collections. So if you take, you think of a section as like a part of a website, and you think a web page, and you think of a layout as like a whole web page of block-based demo content, collections are an entire site of block-based demo content. Now, there's something a little interesting. If you look at these layouts, what you'll see is that the layouts by default have unique kind of design patterns, if you will, right? This one leverages green buttons, and this one leverages blue buttons. And of course, you can go in and modify these layouts, but it's a little bit of extra work as you build out the site. And so what collections do is they take this one step further, and they provide you an entire site worth of sections and layouts that all follow the same design. The way I like to think about collections is, imagine you took a theme with pages and pages of block-based demo content, and then you chopped up all of the block-based demo content and put it in an interface for you to just pick and choose whenever you wanted. That's essentially, to me, what collections are. Is that what you did, Mike? Did you just take theme demo content and literally chop it up to do this?
Not too far from it. It was a lot of taking how we used to do themes and how we used to design themes, and just sort of reimagining it for this new context. So we're able to have the same kind of power of themes, but just even more powerful, because you can pick and choose every section now.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And I got to ask, since I put you on the spot earlier, was it all brand new code, Mike, or did you reuse some of it?
I guarantee you there was some remixed code in there somewhere.
All right, all right. I'm glad you can admit that here. Everyone's been there.
I'm only
Um,
human.
yes, exactly. Nathan, I know obviously you've been theming for a really long time, and frankly, a huge force and kind of influencer in that area. How did you think about like if you look at like the way we're using these blocks and the sections and layouts and kind of this ease of implementing content? I mean, did you feel like this was a big shortcoming in WordPress for a long time, this kind of ease of implementation for like, is this kind of stuff exciting to you, to see this level of ease of use within WordPress itself kind of augmented by Genesis blocks?
Yeah, for sure. I remember we had early conversations, both about the collections and also when we were kind of doing a similar thing for the Genesis framework and the child themes that we have with our one-click theme setup. In this, it's trying to solve this pain point of, sure, the sort of the frame of the website looks a certain way, but getting your homepage to look as attractive as the demo site, that with it's sort of professionally designed and put together by professional designers. Achieving that same level of professionalism, that attractive design with your content is sometimes kind of difficult. And so when we did the one-click theme setup, we kind of solved that, but this takes it, I think, to just a completely different level, mainly because this is not something that happens just at the beginning of your website setup process. This can happen at any point when you're creating a page. As you go into these collections and you say, is there a collection or a layout or a section that really meets the need that I'm looking to sort of achieve, or the goal that I'm trying to achieve when I'm building this page? And you can look through and you can kind of trust that pedigree that StudioPress has with design and providing those well thought out, useful sections of content, not just a theme or template design, but also really getting down more granular and allowing us to provide you professional designs at the content level, is just a really cool thing to be able to do. And then on top of that, to me, the sort of the coup de grace of this whole feature is the fact that you do that, you click, you drop in some stuff, and then you click into those things, and without opening a text editor and without using FTP or anything like that, you change your titles, you're changing your paragraphs, you're changing the way things, you're making it your own, you're swapping out those pictures, and on the fly, you're getting a live preview of what it's looking like on the front end of your website. It's
Yeah,
an absolute game changer as far as I'm concerned.
well, that was fantastic. I should have got my notepad out. A lot of good points in there. I love how you pointed out the notion of one-click theme setup within the Genesis framework, kind of solving for this, at least at site setup. And I remember talking to folks and like, well, I don't need a wizard at setup because I already have content. I just need like new designs and new ways to do that to obtain that velocity, kind of following the workflows that you were describing there. And so I agree, like having that experience on demand is helpful to more folks. And then of course, that's just scratching the surface of what you can do when you actually go to customize the blocks within a page. So I'm going to Command Z a little bit out of that. I think, Nathan, the other thing that stood out to me hearing you talk about that was that notion of one-click theme setup being kind of value in Genesis framework, and us thinking about like, well, how does that value translate into a block first world? And we kind of have to approach things differently. And I love how y'all are thinking about like, well, not just like, well, how do we make it work with FSE, but rather how do we make it work better, right? Not just at the startup, but on demand. And I think that's awesome to see that personally. And hopefully y'all will give this a shot with us and give us some feedback so we can make sure it's as high quality as possible as you know, Genesis Blocks progresses and full site editing gets closer. The other thing that stood out to me, Nathan, I'm gonna place some more of these sections here, just the layouts actually, so folks can see kind of the full page design version. I gotta get to the collections for the collection first, and we'll scroll down here. So again, consistent design. I think, Nathan, the thing that really stood out to me also when I heard you talk was that notion of like inheriting the innovation from the past. If you'll recall earlier in this episode, we talked about like scaling your innovation. What do we mean by that? Well, in the case of Genesis blocks, you get to inherit the design sensibilities, professionalism, and really just thoughtfulness of the Studio Press team, like all of them that participate in this, right? The designs, the code itself, blocks, themes, any design, any element on your website is ultimately an opinion. And when you use that opinion over and over and over and over and over again, but like with a block, you really want to make sure it's a good opinion, right? That design, that code, SEO, all of these properties you're inheriting from the block. And that's great because you can scale that. But the problem with scaling is when you scale good things happen, but sometimes you can scale bad things. And so having that kind of solid background, that solid technology and innovation, design innovation, and being able to scale that is super powerful. But it's really important to make sure you have quality in how you think about scaling your innovation with the block editor. So as we saw, it's pretty easy to add a section of a page, a layout, or a whole page worth of block-based demo content. And then with collections, we have consistency. I'm trying to Command Z out of it, but we have consistency with how the designs are presented. And so that provides you a lot of freedom as you start to build out content without having to modify the block settings to get the design just right for each one of your pages. So we're going to go ahead and do our block-based build. This has really just been to give you all a tour of how some of these capabilities work. And the build actually takes less time than it takes to explain how to do the build. I love this. I built a WordPress site live on stage once at a conference, like it was like 5 or 6 years ago. Mike, how long do you think it took me to do?
A while, for sure.
45 minutes,
yeah.
Simple site. I practiced probably 3 dozen times, every single click, every single mouse movement to make sure I could do it live. I was working with a very smart person who was also helping me. So it was 2 of us doing that. And we like sweated bullets, skin of our teeth, got it done in 45 minutes. We made one mistake on the build. I'll never let Ben Metcalf live that down. But just kidding. Love you, Ben. So let's build out our site. So we'll go back to the front end. We can see we have home, features, contact us, about us. So let's go build out that site and see if we can get ready for content editing in under 45 minutes. I think we can do it in under 5. So which page are we editing? I forgot which one actually. Let's just say
home.
Yeah, it was the home, wasn't it? Okay, so we can see we have layouts in our collection, and we can see we have homepage layout. Awesome. Let's update that. We'll go back to our pages, get contact us, featured, and about us ready to go. All right, so layouts, collection, sample. It's so easy to figure out. I'm sure people have already got the gist, but we'll give them a look anyways. All right, next up, features and services, back to collections, features and services. I'm probably missed one of those update buttons, Mike. One of these pages is going to be blank. I can feel it now.
That's right. That's your one mistake for this one.
Yes. This one was about us, right?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. There we go. Update. Okay, let's see if I beat 45 minutes. Oh, I did. Yay. Okay, so here's the home page with all that beautiful block-based demo content ready to edit. Contact us. Features and services. Home. We actually had a couple of home variants in that collection, but we chose this one. So as you can see, this provides you a really powerful starting point, and not just when you first install the theme, like with one-click theme setup, which is great, but again, has that limitation. But you can invoke this power at any time when you're building out a website. Now you may notice, Mike, I know you're a design nerd. What did you notice about this page right now though? What is like making your eye twitch?
This white bar across the top here.
Oh, the white bar, and the fact that the header doesn't really kind of match down here. It kind of
Right.
does. But this is part of the reason why this is in beta, and you can, you can make modifications to do your own styles with the Genesis block theme in beta. But again, don't forget, full site editing is coming, and we're going to have the same kind of capability in the header menu, in the sidebar, and also in the footer, which you can kind of see kind of hangs out here. Genesis block theme is really kind of just trying to get out of the way of the block editor. And what we'd like you to do, those listening to this episode, is to do a build that's similar to this, and then modify the blocks, play around with the styles, and then as you run into barriers, or even better, as you run into ideas like, I wish it did this and I wish it did that, like, please, please, please provide us that feedback. All right, for the next section of the video or the episode, we're going to talk about building custom blocks. And we'll spend a little bit of time on that. And we're going to finish up with how you can provide feedback if you are able to test Genesis block theme beta. So you might want to build your own blocks. There are a few ways to go about building your own blocks. As Matt Mullenweg asked everyone at WordCamp US in Philadelphia, learn JavaScript deeply. Nathan or Mike, did y'all happen to see that on WordPress TV, or were you happen to be in Philadelphia when he said that?
I did see it. I didn't see it live, but I was watching the stream.
He says, learn. What about you, Nathan?
Yeah, I did see the stream, and I didn't watch it live either. Mike took his advice. I did not, and so
All right.
there you go. We got one of each.
You weren't the only one, Nathan. When Matt says that, I was there actually in Philly. When Matt says learn JavaScript deeply on stage, like 3 people in the back were like, yeah, and like everybody else was like, well, I don't know it yet. So yeah, there's a trend in just web development in general, kind of towards JavaScript in a lot of different ways. But of course, Matt was referencing this because the block editor, when you create custom blocks in particular, leverages React, and the block editor itself leverages React. React is a JavaScript framework. If you'd like to learn JavaScript deeply, I have kind of 3 paths for you to think about. First is the block editor handbook, which you can find at wordpress.org. It's a nice place to see code examples, blocks, and also kind of understand more deeply how the WordPress block editor works. I don't think you're really going to learn JavaScript deeply reading the handbook, but it's a good place to start. Next up is a course by a gentleman named Zach Gordon. It's called JS for WP. Zach is a tremendous educator in the WordPress community. Who is it? Ryan Kinstra, actually, of Genesis Custom Blocks, the creator of Genesis Custom Blocks. He learned React and JavaScript through some of Zach Gordon's courses here. Actually, I don't know if it was under the JS for WP brand, but through Zach Gordon. And then the final recommendation, if you want to go the learn JavaScript deeply route, the React route, is a framework called Create Gutenberg. And there's another famous block person that used this to learn creating blocks. Mike McAllister, do you know who that is?
That would be me, sir. That's right.
Mike McAllister, you learned React through Create Gutenberg. Create Gutenberg is open source. It's distributed by a gentleman named Ahmad Awas. Ahmad is a tremendous contributor to WordPress, so many different things. And this is definitely one of his areas where he was able to shine and still does today. So check it out. All right, Nathan, I guess this one's for you. So since you didn't learn JavaScript deeply, and for a lot of other people in the WordPress ecosystem, right?
Yep.
A lot of people haven't developed those skills and feel comfortable working in React to make custom blocks, which is why we've created Genesis Custom Blocks with our friends, Luke and Ryan from that came over from the Block Lab team, and Genesis Custom Blocks is available for free on WordPress.org. Again, there is a pro version as part of Genesis Pro. So let's see what it's like to make a block. We're going to build this block. We need to raise money for a worthy cause. And as you can see, the block has some elements. It has a title, subtext. It has kind of this notion of a progress bar, has the red, I guess you might call that a stroke or bar around the picture, and then a donate now button. So in the Genesis custom blocks context, what this would look like is something like this. You would log into WP admin and create a new block. So this is very, very easy to do. Kind of any run-of-the-mill WordPress admin has no problem at this point. Definitely no JavaScript, definitely no React at this point. And what we see is that Genesis Custom Blocks allows you to create custom fields that will be used within your block. So you're going to give the field a name. You're going to choose what type of field it is. Is it a text field or an image field or multi-select, toggle, so on and so forth. And then you're going to choose where you want that field to be edited. You can either edit the field and have it be part of the block itself in the editor view in WordPress, or on that right sidebar, which is called the inspector. So you can actually choose, do I want a color field where I can have the user mod the color, or do I want a text field that's displayed in the kind of body, if you will, of the block for the user to edit when they're creating content. So you actually choose where it goes. There's other variables that you can select when adding a field. Once you get the fields created and the block registered, and I'm skipping a couple of steps, but there is documentation on this that you can look up, but it's relatively easy. But then now the block is now visible on within WP admin. Now you might notice there are no editor styles, like this block doesn't look like the block I showed you earlier on the back end. You can of course add those as well. But for this part of the demo, we'll just go ahead and leave these fields blank, knowing that we can still render them how we want on the front end. Now, this is where you're going to need some very, what I consider light anyways, development skills, at least for the kind of bread and butter WordPress developer, right? So if you're out there, I don't know, if you're like the lead developer of Yoast or something, then this is, you can do this in your sleep. But even the bread and butter WordPress developer should be able to operate within these constructs. So what you end up doing is you can actually do this within a theme. This example is showing 2020 child, but of course, if you were doing Genesis block theme beta, you might leverage this approach within that theme structure, but you create essentially a folder that contains a block.css file and a block.php file. You do the same thing in your own custom plugin. As a matter of fact, as themes evolve with full site editing, you might actually have to do it in your own custom plugin. These types of approaches, depending on what PHP functions you're going to be using. So the PHP file fundamentally registers the fields and essentially allows them to be invoked on the front end. You can see the syntax here and the code that was used to create this file, but it's not really doing a whole lot. You actually can add custom PHP in here if you like to do things like have that progress meter. You see that one right there? Tie into things like the Give plugins. You can actually add your own custom PHP in here as well. So the fields not only control what content is used, but you can actually also integrate them with other things, which is kind of neat. From there, of course, you can add the CSS for your block, and you can see we have different fields and different aspects of the CSS that are ultimately applying the style. Again, not going to walk through every line of code here, but the CSS is fundamentally, of course, used to style a block. And then the output of what you just saw is this. So this is how you create your custom vision with Genesis custom blocks. And as you saw, we didn't use React at all. Very minor, easily approachable PHP. And then of course, CSS, which if you're a Genesis person is probably your bread and butter anyways. But if you're creating these custom block experiences, this is a great way to do it. So how are you going to help us with this beta? How are you going to help Nathan and Mike McAllister and the entire Genesis R&D team help prepare the Genesis community and even the broader WordPress community for full site editing? This is how you're going to do it. You're going to download the free version of Genesis blocks. You can check that out at studiopress.com/Genesis-blocks. You're going to download the free version of Genesis custom blocks /Genesis-custom blocks. And then finally, you're going to download the beta version of Genesis block theme. using these three tools together, and particularly Genesis blocks and Genesis block theme, you're going to try your own block first build. You're going to try to do what I did there, using that ease of use and using the customizations within the block editor, maybe even custom blocks, to build out your first block-based website. You're going to look at the themes you like. You're going to look at the things that didn't work. You're going to look at the things you wish you had, and you're going to provide us that feedback. We really, really, really need your feedback as we prepare for full site editing and prepare Genesis and the entire Genesis community for that new reality. Really, really appreciate your contributions here. Genesis has a strong history of community and contributions by the community, and beta testing and providing feedback is one of the ways that you can contribute. And then finally, I'd like you to help us shape the future by providing that feedback to us. We love the tweets, we love the Facebook comments and observations on things we can improve, things we can fix, cool ideas we can implement. But relative to Genesis block theme beta, we'd like that feedback directly. So if you could fill that out in the beta survey, if you go to liturl.co/GBT-survey, we have a survey there for you to provide feedback on. And then we have a Slack channel for Genesis block theme in Genesis WP Slack. So if you can join that channel, you can also provide us feedback there. If you don't know how to join the Genesis WP Slack channel, visit genesis.community. There's a nice little link there to Slack. You can click on it and sign right up. So that's actually been the entire presentation. So we got the context of like where we're at and why this matters, what's coming with full site editing, how folks like Nathan and Mike are helping to prepare Genesis, you, me, everybody in the community for that new reality. You saw me try out some of the tools, like you to do the same thing. And then we talked about how you can submit your feedback to help us shape the future together of Genesis and how we're going to deliver value for everyone within the Genesis community. We really, really appreciate that. I also want to say thank you to our special guests. Nathan, thank you for coming on Genesis Community Livecast.
Yeah, absolutely. This was good. I really
Awesome.
enjoyed it.
Yeah, so glad to have you here. I know, you've been such a big part of WordPress history, just in the things you've done with the folks around you. And I'm just really excited to have you here to help usher in the next era in WordPress and the next era in Genesis. And then I'd also like to thank Mike McAllister. Mike, thanks for jumping on.
Absolutely. This is great. Thanks, DB.
So glad to have you here, Mike. And I love all the innovation you've really added in the block context. I call these block experiences magic time machines. Like I click on a button and like, oh my goodness. I mean, it's so fast how quick that is. And if I'm a freelancer, if I'm an agency and I'm looking for ways to like charge more money, more dollars per hour, build higher quality things faster, and also improve my margins, my efficiency, so I can build those things quicker, but still charge that higher rate. To me, they're magic time machines. So really, really grateful that you're here as well, Mike, to help everyone else in the Genesis community win with these kind of technologies. So
Absolutely.
thank you all for joining us here for the Genesis Community Livecast. Again, my name's David Vogelpol. I've been in the Genesis community for about 10 years now. I lead the Genesis brand at WP Engine, and I love to bring the best of the Genesis community to you here on the Genesis Community Livecast.